Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero. AJ here with something resembling an overview on Immoren's educational institutions, with a bit of brief discussion on related matters. Because of the place universities and the like have within an RPG campaign, when they do appear in the source material, their mention tends towards the cursory. The most oft-cited being Corpus University, as one might expect, given Victor Pendrake's place in the setting. Specifically, the Department of Extraordinary Zoology. Despite this, many institutions for learning are named and at least partially characterized in the RPG books, even if only superficially. But from the nature of the setting and certain aspects and biases displayed by the nations where they are situated, a lot of additional information can be inferred from what's provided. Thus, while some of what follows may not necessarily be canon, most of the added detail could very well be. Education and learning are treated with a great deal of variation across the civilized peoples of Immoren, not just across the continent as a whole. The Junior races and the followers of the Devourer typically tend towards the instinctive and learned from their elders and fellow clanfolk for the most part, with a view to continuing traditions and ancient ways of life, even while adapting to contemporary technologies and potential threats. Case in point, Gobblers are excellent tinkerers, but no one is certain as to quite why this is so, even though their race has no history of technological innovation. Conversely, humans, dwarves and elves, and to a much lesser extent the Skorne, have some degree of formalised educational training, though this depends on one's definition of formal. For the most part, and similar to aforementioned adherence to Dunya and the Worm, common folk join in their parents' or parents' associates' trade, and rise in seniority as an apprentice, journeyman, professional, and finally, master craftsman, or whatever the industry's equivalent labels and honorifics may be. However, a collection of students under a teacher within a classroom setting at a school is not a universal manner of receiving education, whether as a child or as an adult. And though they have grown much more common in the Iron Kingdoms and modern eras, they remain concentrated in urban and distinctly more developed areas. Consequently, further or higher education, shall we say, is also confined to such places, but also tacitly restricted to the wealthier classes, the nobility and society's elites. Rule stands out as something of an oddity, where education is highly formalised and standardised, and in a sense ritualised, yet nothing resembling a university or college really exists in the Dwarven nation. The majority of universities, colleges, and schools of higher education come in four broad categories: religious, military, arcane, and secular. As the most important group of individuals in society when universities first came to be, priests and clergy were both the source of education and its goal. Indeed, most of the oldest universities across the Iron Kingdoms either were or remain spiritual, and secular education, whether of the sciences, arts, or humanities, remains the rarest sort of learning, though it is the most varied and colourful in terms of what courses may be attended. Indeed, as expected of a place like the Protectorate of Menoth, its foremost university is a place where its future priests, scrutators, and sovereigns are taught. In neighbouring Cygnaran, Morons consider the education of their clergy just as seriously, as instanced by the Sancteum Seminary College. Military academies are, by comparison, a much more recent development, with the first established shortly into the Iron Kingdoms era, and many more have opened since then. Several have acquired very high reputations both domestically and internationally, even among nations who would be enemies. Almost without exception, military academies and related schools are state-sponsored, for it is their purpose, after all, to nurture the next generation of men and women who would lead their respective nations' defence. Lessons learned during the centuries of intermittent warfare against each other and the Orgoth taught monarchs and nobles alike that the old system of relying on a state's leadership to fulfil this role in peace and in war had been left to rest on its laurels for much too long. Depending on academy, officer training remains the preserve of the nobility, or rather those wealthy enough to purchase the commission which comes with passing out and the course itself. But at least this has widened the country's pool of officers to include the middle classes and bourgeoisie, as well as the old nobility, provided they have such ambitions, of course. In some rare cases, in no small part thanks to the offer of scholarships, some of the talented from the poorer classes have enrolled and thrived. Arcane centres of learning are what one would expect, where arcanists, warcasters included, refine their abilities and identify their specialisms. In no small part due to the so-called gift of magic, it's little surprise that arcane academies are, like military academies, a product of the formation of the Iron Kingdoms. And although sorcery was known to mankind long before arcane magic, such power was taught and stabilised more innately, instinctively, or by apprenticeship at the very most. However, the aforementioned only holds true of human society, where arcane magic and related sciences have been known and studied for less than a millennium. On the other hand, the formal study of the arcane, if on a much smaller scale, have been present in Rule and Ios for thousands of years, though the concept and purpose remains the same. Lastly are the secular universities. Were it not for the Orgoth invasion, secular universities would have opened their doors much earlier. The Clockwork Renaissance was part of an era of intellectual enlightenment, technological, spiritual, and literary. Religious institutions were gradually evolving to be more all-encompassing in how they educated future priests. Over the centuries, they came to provide extensive courses in philosophy, religious history, ontology, epistemology, and anthropology, as well as the long-studied topics, including theology and theological cosmology. As the expansion of the curriculum brought more secular subjects to the lecture hall, universities eventually started teaching laypersons, which sped up the process of secularized education, a cycle which was brought to a sudden halt by the appearance of the Orgoth. Over 800 years later, when peace returned to Western Immoren, this process would finally be allowed to reach maturity, and in the modern era, there are no few notable universities scattered throughout the Iron Kingdoms with esteemed reputations, whether in general or for specific departments and disciplines. Across Immoren, though, not all nations treat the education of their people, whether in political, military, arcane, or theological disciplines, the same way. To get the obvious out of the way, all know how the Protectorate of Menoth and Sul Menites view arcane magic and sorcery. With the characteristic Menite zeal which they apply to all aspects of life and existence, it should come as no surprise that anything except religious education does not have much place in the Protectorate. The arcane is heavily regulated, while the secular is disdained, and also heavily regulated. Consequently, beyond that of simple literacy purely to understand and heed the true law, all types of education are rolled into one, and conducted primarily at the Lyceum of the True Law at Immoren, which has several subordinate campuses scattered throughout the country. However, the Lyceum itself additionally holds the sole responsibility for training the Protectorate's warcasters and military leadership. Secular arts and humanities are taught, but only in a very limited sense, and mostly as a tool against non-Menites. In keeping with some of its more unfortunate stereotypes, Ord is not known for the quality of university education offered, despite being home to a fair handful of centres for learning, including the Merrin School of Learned Sciences. Unlike other comparable schools, there is no system of subject-related departments, and students apply to lecturers and professors directly to attend their classes, rather than receiving a predefined timetable. Because of this lack of compartmentalization, applicability is heavily promoted, which has led to many technological innovations over the centuries. Despite this, though, next to its rivals abroad, the Merrin School is small, has a low enrollment rate, levies high tuition fees to account for insufficient public funding, and is attended almost entirely by the nobility and wealthier mercantile classes owing to said tuition fees. This is somewhat a result of poor literacy in general across Ord, even now, and indeed the best prospects can be found at the military academies, particularly the Ordic Royal Navy Academy, which includes the Trident School where the nation's warcasters are trained. As one might expect, the ages have not been kind to Llael, and that includes her places of education. Into the modern era, only really the Merowyn Academy has weathered all which countless invasions have inflicted upon that country. It is nonetheless a prestigious university, and graduates often enter public service, whether in the church or government. However, it is also notorious for being extremely detached from Llaeli society. Elsewhere, universities have come and gone, while some have even been revived. A notable example is the Llaerin College of Alchemy, in reality more of an annex to the Thunderhead. Talented researchers there were scouted for the Order of the Golden Crucible, while important alchemic contributors from the Order would often act as lecturers and research leads at the college. The Khadoran invasion led to an exodus of its staff, much like that of the Golden Crucible in general, made worse with the Protectorate counterattack. The latter led to the outright dissolution of the college, only to be reopened as the short-lived Forum of the True Law in Llaerin. The then hierarch Voiles attempted to use Llaeli's alchemical knowledge to further Sulmenite technology, turning Menoth's fury to other purposes, such as increasing its potency and flexibility as a fuel and weapon, etc. But because of the aforementioned brain drain, as it were, almost nothing came of this, and Voiles' successor, Severius, promptly closed the college again. It is possible that, if peace were to return to Llael, and if it lasts, the college, whose buildings remain largely undamaged, may open its doors once more. Similar to Llael, if for very different reasons, is Khador, insomuch there are not many universities or similar establishments to be found in the Northern Empire. More so than Ord, Khador's efforts to educate their citizenry started only relatively recently compared to other nations of Immoren. A combination of this and the Khadoran throne's propensity for centralizing all aspects of life throughout the realm means secular universities of the like found in Cygnaran do not exist pretty much at all. Since all things must be done for the betterment of the motherland, pure academia, that is, knowledge for the sake of knowledge, is discouraged in favour of lessons which lead to practical purpose, meaning there is also a lack of religious universities. Predictably, the well-educated, whether noble or merely wealthy, are so mostly thanks to hiring private tutors, and public schools reach only basic levels of literacy and numeracy, suitable for rural farmers or tradesmen. Indeed, the very idea of an adult attending a class, whether in a laboratory or a lecture hall, is bizarre to most Khadoran commoners, and odd even to among the better read of them. Skilled trades, on the other hand, often have formal qualifications associated with them, which can be earned at the Collegia in Skrovenberg, which is the closest Khador has to a network of universities, though they are more akin to vocational colleges. Somewhat similar is the Khadoran Institute of Engineering, which offers courses preparing its students for careers in industry, often associated with the military. On that note, the Druzhina is Khador's foremost military academy, along with the Naval College in Vardafar. If anything, despite being a military training centre, the Druzhina is known to educate its officer cadets rigorously in a range of more secular subjects, history, maths, physics and politics, among others, as well as strictly military matters. In contrast to Khador, Cygnar has a certain level of pretension to enlightenment, as demonstrated by their extensive selection of universities, so much so every major city can boast at least one notable institute. Thus, secular education is easy to come by, where the Royal Cygnaran University, the Caspian Royal Academy, Corvus University, and the University of Mercia are merely the most well-known among some dozens. The lattermost stands out for its association with the Great Cygnaran Observatory, which is in part a research facility whose staff often offer lecture courses. The University of Mercia also shares a close relationship with the Cygnaran Navy, serving as not so much an academy per se, and more a preparatory school. The actual naval academy can be found at Sentinel Point Naval Fortress, while the army equivalent is based in Caspia at the Cygnaran Strategic Academy, which doubles as the place to learn and refine arcane magic, being the training site for gun majors of the Order of the Arcane Tempest. Consequently, line officers and warcasters alike attend the Strategic Academy, if in different departments. Subordinate branches of the Strategic Academy at smaller campuses can be found scattered throughout the kingdom to allow officer cadets to continue their studies while they are on field secondments or attending regional manoeuvres and war games. Meanwhile, religious education in Cygnar has its exemplar at the Sancteum as previously mentioned. Unlike all which has been mentioned thus far, universities in Ios are very different, not least because they have been an accepted and integrated part of elven urban life for thousands of years. The Iosans had long been given knowledge from the divine court, and what better place to give, share and acquire such knowledge than at a university? The institutes of education throughout the Iosan Empire are something of a legend these days, but an established tradition nevertheless, which continued in the millennia after the Cataclysm, if on a much smaller scale. That said, analogues of religious universities such as the Lyceum or Sancteum never existed in Ios or Laios, since the norm was near direct communion with the gods. Priests were thus trained at temples under appropriately qualified clergy and senior members of the priesthood. As to the military, there was no need for such academies, as secrecy and the magic of the Mistbal were Ios' defences for the longest time. Such training to be officers of the House Guard and other units is left to the seasoned officers of the Eriths, or each house's preferred means, none of which includes classroom attendance per se. Thus, Iosan universities almost exclusively tend towards secular courses, while also including the arcane at the same time. The sciences which contribute to arcanica and arcane magic have always been an accepted and almost mundane part of an existence, so it was only natural for its tutelage to be treated like any other academic subject. While Ios was still young, each Ithil established their own university as soon as the nation could support such strictly academic endeavours on an ongoing basis. But with the expansion of subject courses beyond the fundamentals of literature, law, mathematics, history, cosmology, arcanical engineering, among others, regional specializations arose, reflecting the ambitions of the resident Halatir and the character of the god who gave their name to the Ithil. As such, the University of Tessira at Iris was and remains known for its School of Medicine and Department of Arcane Law, as befits its patron goddess and where House Var's seat of power is. Similarly, the University to Lurinsar at Linchinal boasted an unparalleled Department of Arcanical Engineering, which is no surprise since many of the lecturers are also fabricators and arcanists of House Shail. And Shir is no different, where the University to Lasir is home to Ios' only department of the fine arts, a subject which is usually taught in smaller ateliers and workshops to aspiring amateurs. As one may surmise, the universities of the other Ithils closed their doors and classrooms some generations ago with the abandonment of those regions, their specialisms also abandoned, or subsumed by the other three which remain. As to the rest of Immoren, with Crix I'm quite sure necromancers and sorcerers of their stripe receive training from masters, though I have little inclination to confirm this. Meanwhile, I'm similarly certain any religious education in the Nightmare Empire is education only by the most tenuous of interpretations of that word. The Skorne Empire, however, is something of an odd one out, shall we say. Since they do not believe in the power of any god or pantheon, it is obvious they would not have any use for religious schools as we in the West might understand it. But they nevertheless value intelligence and learning, if of a different sort. To the best of my knowledge, their schools, for I hesitate to consider them either college or university, may be categorized in one of two ways: military and philosophical. Like the Iron Kingdoms, their tradesmen learn via the system of apprenticeship, so this bears little further mention. Little is known about how Skorne philosophy is disseminated throughout the Empire, but given the strength of mortitages, whether they studied the ways of Morkash or Kexoris or another of the revered ancient Skorne philosophers, there is a sort of standard to whatever loose Skorne educational system which may exist. Nobles have a more cloistered education in this regard, but those given to the philosophical castes, for lack of a better way of putting it, attend what Westerners may recognise as classes, even if they are conducted in a thoroughly alien manner. More evidently formalised is a high-ranking warrior's martial training. Within each great house and each tour, there are places where swordsmanship and the Hoxene are taught and or espoused. Among the ranks of a tyrant's or dominar's regular troops, be they cataphract or praetorians, there will be a range of fighting styles utilised even if the equipment is identical or close to it. Rival martial schools focus on said equipment from contrasting perspectives, something which extends to how they train officers and nobles as commanders. And given the inclusion of the Hoxene as part of the process, the philosophies of Uxoris I Exalted lend a sliver of bookishness to this education. This is a quirk of having schools of combat, as it were, is demonstrated in Llael as well, for that while they have traditional universities, as noted previously, they also have numerous organisations known as schools, where the many aspects of duelling are taught, along with the weapons involved, the deep-rooted traditions behind the duello, and the sense of ceremony which surrounds it all. But obviously, none of this constitutes a college or university education or analogue thereof. Indeed, what would coursework even entail here?